Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A video number 58. Make sure to keep asking questions. Doesn't matter they're about. They can be about anything. Just know I do not respond to review requests or Let's Play requests in these videos, but I will respond to them in the comments. Once again, review requests are what do you think about insert game here. If you ask me about a very specific feature of them or some sort of news event surrounding them or something like that, then that's fine, but don't ask me what I think about the game themselves, because that's a review request. Gameplay in the background is of Banished because I'm working on it right now, and it sort of kind of fits in with the last question for this Q&A, but in a different genre than the specific one that was asked about. But we'll get to there when we get to there. Let's start with a question from Denim Ticken. What do you think about the horrible optimization in certain PC ports like Batman Arkham Knight, Assassin's Creed Unity, etc.? And do you feel this is becoming a plague that will kill PC gaming? It's not going to kill PC gaming. I don't know where you got that idea. The really bad PC ports are actually fairly few and far between these days. Warner Brothers seems to have issues with them, and Ubisoft occasionally has some issues with them. But generally speaking, most PC versions of games are generally alright. Or if they aren't alright on launch, usually it only takes a couple of patches and suddenly they're fine. I mean, this stuff was way worse with the last gen of consoles when things were just made for the one specific console, and then when they ported it over, they didn't even bother trying, like with the original Dark Souls. And we all know how awful that was on PC, so I mean, things have actually gotten better rather than worse. And even though the bad porting is still a problem, it's not the biggest problem that we're having, namely that the games themselves are just bare bones PC ports, where even though it works fine and it generally plays fine, they don't have all the features that you would really expect from a PC version. Or even worse, they don't even work at all on keyboard and mouse if you try to play it on that. For example, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, you basically can't play that on keyboard and mouse. You have to get a gamepad for that. And even though a gamepad, I guess, should be standard equipment for PC gamers anyway, it's still just really sad that they'll release a game on PC and say, well, the main control device on PC just won't work with this game. That's just ridiculous. So, if anything, that's more of a problem than anything else. The fact that some games just won't work on standard PC controls and you have to get an extra device to do so. But as far as the big nasty PC ports like Batman Arkham Knight and Assassin's Creed Unity, it's really more of a side effect of the corporate structure of video game development these days. And it seems like, especially with the Steam refund policy coming in, that we're going to see a lot less of that happening. At least I hope so. Batman Arkham Knight is kind of the proving grounds for this, because it was a nightmare when it came out, and it's unplayable for most people, myself included, although other people have gotten really lucky with it and actually don't seem to run into any major problems. That kind of thing is just completely unacceptable, and I think we've made our voices heard about that sort of thing. So hopefully this will resolve itself more than anything else. Assassin's Creed Unity was a complete disaster on PC. Arkham Knight is also a disaster, and as I'm recording this video, it's still not up for sale. So by the time this video goes live, maybe that'll change, but I very highly doubt that. And so we've made our voice as the consumers known, and I think that's going to go a long way in actually helping this thing out. Unfortunately, there are some really, really crappy PC versions out there, like the DOA 5 port, which was just awful and still doesn't have online multiplayer about a month or so after its release. Things like that's just unacceptable, but unfortunately Japanese companies do not care, and they never did care. That's really a shame, but Western companies understand the value of PR, apparently. So this is getting a lot of bad PR for those people who have put together these really crappy PC versions. And it's starting to show. They're making inroads to try to fix things. Next question is from Mecha Breadzilla. How do you prefer Gore to be used in games? Do you think it's necessary for some games to have a ton of it? Not really. I'd rather Gore be used in either a realistic manner, in that the game is trying to be realistic and thus the gore is also realistic, or make it something completely nonsensical and ridiculous, and that ends up being just kind of silly. But then there's other games that use it in a really weird way, like Hotline Miami uses gore in a really fascinating way. It's not really a realistic game by any stretch of the imagination, but it is hyper violent. And the stuff you're doing to these virtual characters is downright brutal. And the gore is used to accentuate this by just making it even more over the top and just visceral. And that ends up actually making a point without necessarily making a point, if that makes sense. See, there's an interesting kind of side thing with Hotline Miami that is in regards to the whole psychosis of the main character and everything. And one of the things they say is, "Do you enjoy hurting other people?" or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording of the line. But it just is one of those things that just kind of drives home this hyper-violent game is more than just a hyper-violent game. So gore can be used in any number of fashions. I just don't like it when it's used over the top for no discernible reason. For example, with Quake 4, they put a ridiculous amount of gore into that game for no discernible reason. And it wasn't even like in the older Quake games, where it was kind of corny and still over the top, but it was done in this manner that wasn't really all that to be taken seriously. And yet, when you get to Quake 4, it's pretty much playing the entire thing deadly seriously. And when it throws in all this gore, it's just there, it's like, okay, apparently the designers really liked gore. And it's kind of unnerving how much they liked gore. And that's pretty much it. So, sometimes it can backfire on you, and you just have to be careful with it. Like I said, if you're doing something that's over the top and ridiculous, and also doing some over the top and ridiculous gore, that can work just fine. If you're doing something like Quake 4, where it's trying to be a bit serious, and yet the gore is ridiculous, then it actually just comes up as in bad taste. And if you're doing something that's trying to make a point, you can use that to make a point as well. And of course, if you're trying to be realistic gore is fine too. So, as long as it's consistent with the feel of the game, it's fine. Moving on to a question from Andre PC Gaming for Life. At least I'm guessing I'm pronouncing your first name right. I don't know. In your opinion, which are the most overrated game franchises and which are the most underrated? Overrated? There's so many. So many, I can't even list them. The single most overrated game I have ever played is Final Fantasy VII. I'm going to be right up front with you. I can't stand Final Fantasy VII. Now don't worry, I'm going to review Final Fantasy VII at some point. So you'll get the full thoughts on that in that particular video, whenever that happens. I don't have any remote ETA for you on that, because that game is long and it's actually extremely irritating to play, so I can't play it for more than about 20 to 30 minutes at a time without wanting to smash my head into a concrete wall. But I digress. Let's talk about other games that are extremely overrated. Batman Arkham games. People act like they're masterpieces. They're not. They're just competent games. The fact that they're competent games make them stand leaps above pretty much every other superhero game out there. And that's partly why people hold them so dearly. Because they're just desperate for a good superhero game, and the Batman Arkham games are just decent superhero games. So that's good enough to call it a masterpiece, apparently. They're not masterpieces, by any stretch of the imagination. They're not bad games either, so... And there's other games. The Halo series is mind-bogglingly overrated. The StarCraft series is actually, pretty much everything that Blizzard has made is extremely overrated. Diablo 1 is the single most boring game I've ever played in my life. StarCraft is, well, the campaigns are alright, but the multiplayer is infuriating because it's designed around a very competitive set, and if you aren't one of the competitive players and you don't have the math formula down for the exact way to win, you're not going to win or even hold a candle to anybody else. That game has reduced RTS to a math formula. That's just sad. Warcraft, I didn't play enough of Warcraft to really say much about it, but honestly, what I did play was just fairly average. And that's part of the problem. Games like Blizzard makes are decently made, they're just fairly average fare, but they're well polished, and for some bizarre reason, people act like they're the best thing on the planet. Drives me crazy. I could go on about this for a long time, honestly. There are tons of overrated games out there. Underrated, though? I don't know. Gothic 3, maybe? A lot of people hated Gothic 3. I really enjoyed it. It was very much a Gothic game, even though it had tons of problems. Dark Messiah always gets a really bad rep, but it's a very fun game, and it has some really satisfying melee combat. Another one in a series was Mortal Kombat 3. For some reason, that one got a really bad rep, and once again, it's a really solid, really enjoyable fighting game once you get past the fact that it's not Mortal Kombat 2. So, there's a few underrated games out there, but they're to a much lesser degree than the overrated ones. The overrated games tend to have ridiculously huge fan bases for no reason I can actually fathom. I mean, again, Final Fantasy VII. Why the hell do people like that game so much? Even compared to the previous games in the series, it's inferior. The only reason I can really come up with for that is pure nostalgia and nothing else. Because, I mean, even if you ask an older Final Fantasy fan, people who played that series from the beginning all the way to the new ones, they'll probably tell you that their favorite was Final Fantasy VI, and not 7. At least in my experience, when I've been talking to Final Fantasy fans, they just like, yeah, Final Fantasy 7's ain't, but Final Fantasy 6 is way better. And I just sit there going, okay, whatever. Anyway, I've ranted enough about this topic for the time being. Let's move on to a question from Last W. Wolf. Do you have a favorite fantasy setting or world, whether it be from books, movies, video games, etc.? There's not really a particular favorite I have. I do have a few favorites. For example, of course, Tolkien. Middle-earth is just completely full of rich lore, and even though it's often kind of hard to sift through, I mean, if you guys have read the Silmarillion, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's just fascinating. Just this sheer amount that this guy put into this world, just as fleshing it out. Just creation myths, actual histories that go back thousands upon thousands of years. It's really cool to have all of this stuff that really just makes that world that much more rich. I'm rather fond of A Song of Ice and Fire and its world. It's very well fleshed out with tons of history, tons of really cool stuff in it. The Witcher universe is very interesting, although I haven't read as many of those books as I'd like, so I haven't gotten the full picture of the Witcher universe yet. I'm going to work on doing that as soon as I can, though. I really like the Planescape setting for D&D, and it's kind of hard to sift through, but it's just a really interesting, really cool setting that's just really out there and sparks the imagination like few other worlds I've seen. I feel like if I had read more into Numenera that I would like that, but I haven't read enough into Numenera to really be able to get a full picture of that world either. But it looks really interesting. And there's also the Glorantha setting for RuneQuest. That's a really interesting setting. Look it up if you get the chance. It's really better seen for yourself than if I tried to explain it to you, because I actually don't know as much about the Glorantha setting as I really like. Most of my knowledge actually comes from King of Dragon Pass, because even though I do have RuneQuest, I don't have the Glorantha setting books for it. So that's pretty annoying, but the setting itself is just really intriguing to me. So I'm looking forward to getting some Glorantha setting books as soon as I can, if they ever make them for 6th edition, or if I can just find them for older editions and try to convert the rules and everything. Because, again, it's just a really fascinating setting. But yeah, there's plenty of settings that are really cool out there, and I just try to pick something that coincides with what I'm feeling at the time, whether I want something that's a bit more sci-fi or a bit more fantasy than one or the other. So let's move on to the final question in this Q&A, and what kind of ties in with Banished, which is from Baba Snooker. Do you think the traditional RTS is a dying genre? No, I don't. I think it's a niche genre. It always has been a niche genre. And the fact that the main companies are focusing on major markets just dictates they won't be making RTSs. Would I like to see more games like, say, Age of Empires out on the market? Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is that that's a fairly archaic way of doing things at this point. There's only so much you can do with that formula before it just becomes retreading old ground. But even then, I don't know if that's entirely what you mean by traditional RTS, because there never was really such a thing as a traditional RTS. There were several different styles. Just because the StarCraft, Warcraft, Age of Empires style really caught on, doesn't really make it a traditional RTS, so to speak. But if that's the style you're referring to, then unfortunately StarCraft dominates that market. There is basically not a single game that you can release in that style, other than another Age of Empires, that would come even remotely close to challenging StarCraft's dominance. And that goes back to the whole Blizzard games are incredibly overrated thing, but that's beside the point. That sort of style of RTS is kinda stagnant, actually, and I would rather see somebody in the indie scene try to pick something like that up and try to do something different with it if they can at this point, and see what happens from there. But other than that, there's not really much you can do about the dominance of StarCraft in the market. I mean, that's some insanely stiff competition right there. And if you're talking about other styles of RTS, well, I mean, if you go with the Dune 2 lineage, which includes the Command & Conquer series, that series eventually did things that were fairly different from the predecessors, and it just kind of sputtered out. And we haven't really had all that much since then that was a lot like that. So I guess the proper phrase for traditional RTSs at this point is dormant. I would never say that the genre is dead or dying, because, I mean, you never know. Much like with Banished, when Banished came out, city-building games were pretty much a thing of the past. And yet, here comes Banished, a game made by one guy, and yet it's a city-building game, and it's fairly complex, in fact. And it definitely found a market. There's a game that came out pretty recently, a Lethis Path of Progress, that is in the style of the old Sierra Impressions City Builder series, the stuff like Caesar and Zeus and all that. And it also found a market. Thing is, you have to find somebody who knows what they're doing and can actually develop something like an RTS. There's actually a lot of effort that has to go into an RTS to make it good. You just have to keep that in mind. It takes a lot of dedication, and even though there are definitely developers out there who could do it, the question is, if or when. And hopefully they'll get on that. But, again, I would not call it a dead or dying genre. I would call it dormant. It's waiting for the appropriate moment to strike, so to speak. Anyway, that was Q&A 58. Make sure to keep asking questions. I will catch you guys in later videos.